A dead river, a loyal dog, and a steel door no one was meant to open. One scorching summer night, under a silent sky, war veteran Ethan Cole and his German shepherd, Rex, heard a pulse beneath the cracked riverbed, a warning. What they found wasn't just an old bunker, it was a vault of pure water, untouched by time. If a miracle like this was hidden for decades, what else sleeps beneath our feet? Before we end, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments below and subscribe. The heat lay over Stillwater Valley like a weight too soft to fight and too heavy to ignore. The river was no longer a river, just a cracked spine of clay stitched with brittle weeds. The air smelled of dust and iron, and somewhere far upstream, a pump moaned in a farmer's field like an old man refusing to sleep. Ethan Cole stood at the bank, boots planted on what had once been the riverbed. He was 47, broad in the shoulders, lean in the waist, the kind of man who'd spent too many years working in places where mistakes were final. His dark brown hair was cut short, flecked with gray at the temples, and the stubble on his square jaw shaded the lines that war had carved, but time had not softened. His gray eyes didn't dart. They measured. Next to him, pacing the edge of the bank, was Rex, a 7-year-old German shepherd with a saddle of soot on golden wheat fur. His ears stood like twin antennae, tail held level, every muscle reading the ground as if the earth itself were speaking in low frequencies. Rex rarely barked. He didn't need to. He was trained to notice what people missed. Ethan trusted that more than he trusted most men. For 3 nights, the hum had returned, a sound low and steady, too deep to be wind, too rhythmic to be chance. It came after midnight, when even the crickets gave up their song. It was not loud, but it lived in the soles of his boots, the way incoming mortars used to before sound caught up with them. Rex always heard it first, ears flicking, head lifting toward the dry heart of the riverbed. Ethan rubbed his palm against the back of his neck, a habit left over from years crouched under heat and noise. He tried to convince himself it was an old pipe vibrating, maybe something from the irrigation systems upstream. But deep down, he knew pipes didn't hum like that. Pipes didn't make the ground tremble in small, deliberate pulses. "You hear it too, Captain," he murmured. That was what he called Rex when they were alone. Rex froze, eyes narrowing, chest expanding as he pulled air through his nose. A soft growl rolled in his throat. Ethan didn't need more confirmation than that. He scanned the far bank, porch blinds drawn against the heat, a single box fan pushing air in tired circles. No one else heard it. Mr. Tolson, the half-deaf neighbor, wouldn't. The kids at the gas station wouldn't either. They were too busy burning cheap gas and louder music. But maybe Maggie Reynolds would. Maggie, with her sharp hands and sharper mind, could hear when machines lied. Maggie was 50, wiry and strong, with iron gray hair braided down her back and a jaw that didn't bend easily. She owned the only real mechanic shop in town, a place where farm trucks went in coughing and came out breathing. Ethan respected her. She wasn't a talker, but when she spoke about engines, you listened. He made a mental note. If the sound was still there tomorrow, she'd be the first he called. Rex crept forward, paws silent on the cracked mud. The dog paused, nose hovering an inch from a fissure running through the riverbed. The hum returned, stronger, a shiver instead of a whisper. Ethan crouched and pressed his hand to the clay. It vibrated, not wildly, but with the measured insistence of something alive. 3 nights was a pattern. 4 was a message. He let out a long breath and straightened. He should go home. Fix the greenhouse mister. Check the mower blades Maggie lent him. Do the chores that built walls around the world so he didn't have to look at what might be breaking beneath it. But the hum came again. And men like Ethan didn't ignore messages twice. He went to his shed. The shovel was hanging right where it always hung, left of the door, handle worn smooth where his calloused hand met it. He grabbed it, returned to the fissure, and dug. He dug the way soldiers learned to dig, deliberate, shallow at first, testing, never committing before knowing what slept below. Rex stood guard at the rim of the trench, tail rigid, breath steady. At 2 feet, the soil changed texture from baked clay to gritty sand. At 3 feet, the shovel struck something that did not belong to the river. Clink. Ethan froze. Every instinct that had once kept him alive under incoming fire flared awake. He crouched and brushed the soil aside with his fingertips. Under the grit lay a smooth, dull surface. Metal, maybe steel, maybe something older. The hum pulsed again, and now he could feel it through his knees. The thing beneath was flat, deliberate, manufactured. Ethan's pulse climbed. The last time he felt this mix of curiosity and danger, he was halfway around the world with a map full of places that wanted to kill him. But Montana soil wasn't supposed to hold secrets. Not like this. He checked the edges, tapping with the butt of the shovel. A hollow echo answered at the center, deeper, colder. There was a cavity beneath the metal. Rex gave a short, low bark, not panicked, but sharp. Warning. Ethan glanced at him and saw the dog's hackles rise like bristles. His breathing had shifted from quiet to controlled readiness, the way he used to before they entered a clearing overseas. "Easy, boy," Ethan whispered, though the words were for himself too. He could force the panel, but forcing things in unknown ground was how men ended up with names on plaques. Humility came hard, but it stayed when learned under fire. He sat back, sweat dripping down his temples, and stared at the steel patch. The heat was intensifying. It wasn't just the sun. It was the weight of the unknown pressing back. He drove a wooden stake next to the trench, scrawled, "Mark, do not step," on it in black marker, and pushed the soil back to cover the edges of the metal. Rex leaned against his leg, warm and steady as if reminding him. There's time, but there's also a clock ticking somewhere below. As he walked back toward the cabin, the hum faded again, like a secret, pulling its lips shut. But the silence didn't feel empty anymore. It felt crowded. That night, Ethan lay on his back in the dark, listening. The hum returned like the earth remembering its heartbeat. Rex lifted his head, but didn't growl this time. He didn't need to. Ethan was already awake, counting the pulse beneath him, like a man measuring the fuse he hadn't lit. Tomorrow, he told himself. Tomorrow, he would bring Maggie. Tomorrow, the secret under the river would stop whispering and start answering. The sun crept into Stillwater Valley, slow and patient, like a hand pushing aside a thin curtain. Mist hung low over the cracked riverbed, turning the dry world briefly soft before the heat burned it away. Birds perched on the cottonwoods as if they too were waiting to see what the day would reveal. Ethan Cole had not really slept. He had closed his eyes, yes, but sleep was just a long negotiation with a mind that didn't trust quiet nights. The hum beneath the earth had returned twice before dawn. Not loud, not violent, but steady, as if reminding him that it hadn't been a dream. His body remembered that kind of sound from years ago, the low, mechanical murmur of something buried, something waiting. He pulled on his boots and stepped outside with a mug of black coffee, watching the pale light spread across the riverbed. Rex trotted ahead, moving with the alert calm of a soldier starting a patrol. The German shepherd's coat caught the first light, black saddle glinting against golden fur, amber eyes sharp and searching. 7 years old, and still moving like a shadow with muscles, Rex lowered his nose near the stake Ethan had driven into the ground the night before. Ethan's own chest tightened when the dog started pawing at the soil. "Easy, Captain," he murmured, crouching down beside him. But Rex kept digging, claws scraping through the dried clay, tail stiff as a blade. Then came the sound. A hard clink, as paw met something not made by nature. Ethan brushed aside the loose dirt with calloused fingers. There it was, a corner of dark, rusted steel. But this wasn't the flat plate he'd found last night. This was something else. Something smaller, boxed in, half swallowed by the ground. His breath slowed into the kind of steady rhythm he'd learned in places where surprises often killed people. He worked carefully with his hands and the tip of the shovel, clearing around the object until it came free with a low groan of metal against earth. It was a box, rectangular, reinforced edges. A latch meant to last longer than whoever buried it. Military issue. Ethan didn't need a label to recognize the design. He carried the box up the bank to a patch of flat ground. Rust flaked off under his thumb. The latch resisted, but a screwdriver and stubborn patience won out. Inside, folded maps, sealed wax paper, the smell of iron and old fire. And on top, a half-burned letter whose edges curled like leaves in autumn. Ethan unfolded the largest map on the ground, anchoring the corners with small stones. Faded black lines branched out like veins beneath the river, converging at a central mark. Project Haven. 3 smaller nodes radiated outward. North intake, storage delta, command vault. These weren't the kind of markings you found on irrigation blueprints. These were Cold War fingerprints. He didn't need the entire letter to understand the warning. Words like water source, preserve, and at the bottom, 3 clear words. Water saves everything. The night's unease hardened into certainty. This wasn't a story he could shrug off like a bad dream. Something lived under Stillwater, or slept there. He took the box back to his kitchen table, cleared away the morning clutter, and laid out the map beneath the lamp. The smell of coffee and wood smoke filled the cabin, familiar and grounding, but it didn't settle the tight coil in his chest. He remembered the hum. He remembered the steel plate beneath the soil. And now, this box. Who buried you? He thought. He also remembered who he trusted, Maggie Reynolds. Ethan had thought of her the night before, when he was deciding whether to open that plate. She was one of the few people in town who didn't dismiss strange things with a laugh. Maggie was a woman who had listened to machines long enough to tell when they were lying. She'd know what to do with this map. By mid-morning, the crunch of boots on his gravel road announced her before her voice did. Maggie Reynolds was tall, lean, 50 years old, with sun-creased skin and gray hair braided down her back. She carried the authority of someone who had spent a lifetime earning respect rather than demanding it. Her faded work shirt clung to the shape of a mechanic's life. Strong arms, scarred knuckles, and a stubborn spine. She stepped onto his porch without knocking. Maggie never knocked. and gave him the look she gave stalled engines. "You look like you wrestled a ghost and lost," she said. "Close enough," Ethan replied, half a smile tugging at one corner of his mouth. "Rex told me something was up." She scratched the dog's neck, and Rex leaned into her hand with quiet approval. He rarely let anyone touch him that way. Maggie was the exception. She had earned even the dog's trust. Inside, Maggie stood over the kitchen table, staring at the map with both hands braced on the wood. "Project Haven," she read aloud. "Haven't seen that name in a long time." "You know it?" "I know the pattern." Her voice flattened, dipping into old territory. "Back when I worked with the Corps, they built underground facilities all over the damn country. Most of them got sealed up or forgotten when the money dried out. Some of them weren't supposed to exist in the first place." Ethan watched the way her eyes narrowed on the word vault. He remembered something she'd once told him after too many beers at the Legion Hall. About a collapse during an inspection. About a friend she couldn't pull out fast enough. That was the day she stopped listening to orders and started listening to steel. Maggie tapped the map with a scarred finger. "This here? It's not irrigation. It's infrastructure. And if it's still down there, it hasn't seen daylight in decades." "Everyone in town will think I've lost it," Ethan said. "They already think that," she replied dryly. "But that's never stopped you before?" Ethan huffed a quiet laugh. It was the first easy sound he'd made since last night. Maggie crouched to Rex's level, her braid slipping over her shoulder. "You're planning to go down there, aren't you?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "I just want to know what's under my feet," Ethan said. "If it's nothing, we walk away. But if it's something—" She stood, brushing dirt from her hands. "Then we don't tell the sheriff. Not yet. He'd lock it down before we could blink." Ethan nodded. "We do it quiet. I still have some survey rigs, ground sensors. Not fancy, but good enough to tell if there's a hollow chamber down there." Her voice had that old edge again, the one she used when fixing something that could kill you if you got it wrong. Ethan felt a quiet resolve settle into his bones, the kind that used to come before missions he didn't talk about afterward. Purpose didn't always feel like hope. Sometimes it felt like grit between your teeth. Maggie met his eyes. "We start tonight." Rex shifted toward the window, ears lifting to a breeze sliding down the valley. The hum didn't return, but Ethan could feel it somewhere beneath his boots, a quiet waiting sound. He laid his hand on the map. "All right then," he said. "Tonight." The sky over Stillwater Valley darkened early, as if evening had arrived ahead of schedule. Low clouds pressed against the ridge, turning the riverbed into a dull mirror of gray and bronze. The air was thick with the kind of stillness that comes before storms, not loud, but tight, like the world itself holding its breath. Ethan Cole stood beside Maggie Reynolds in her mechanic's workshop, the single yellow bulb above them flickering with tired persistence. The place smelled like oil and rust, but to Ethan it was steadier than home. Every tool on Maggie's wall was hung like a soldier in formation. Wrenches, cables, meters, wire coils, each exactly where it belonged. Maggie liked order. Order made sense. Secrets did not. She leaned over the map of Project Haven, spread across a steel workbench. Her wiry frame cast a long shadow on the concrete floor, her gray braid tucked behind one shoulder, a smudge of grease on her sleeve. Maggie was 50 years old and carried herself like someone who had seen things break in the dark and learned to fix them anyway. Her sharp, silver-gray eyes followed the thin, black lines that cut across the map like veins. These aren't just tunnels, she muttered, tracing a finger along the central circle. They're conduits. Big ones. Conduits for what? Ethan asked, arms crossed. His voice carried that low gravel it always did when he didn't trust a situation, which was often. For water, she said, without hesitation. Look here. She tapped a series of faded symbols, triangles, stacked over circles. I saw this coding back when I was still doing field work. Military water transfer systems, Cold War era. They used natural aquifers as hidden reservoirs. If this map's real, there's a buried pipeline running through this valley, connecting every lake within 50 miles. Ethan stared at the lines. They intersected directly beneath Stillwater, where the cracked riverbed now sat bone dry. So, whatever's under us, it's still connected. Maybe. Maggie leaned back, wiping her hands on a rag. Or maybe it's dead, like everything else around here. Ethan didn't answer. His mind was caught on the hum, on the metal plate, on the box, buried where no box should have been. A puzzle was unfolding beneath his boots, and every piece fit too perfectly to be an accident. He'd learned to trust his gut long before he learned to trust blueprints. Rex, sprawled near the open doorway, lifted his head. The German shepherd's amber eyes caught the faint light outside. His ears tilted forward, nostrils flaring. A low rumble built in his chest, deep enough to vibrate against the concrete. Ethan recognized the sound immediately. It wasn't just a bark warning. It was that other thing, the signal that something out there didn't belong. "What is it, Captain?" Ethan murmured, but he already knew. Rex rose, tail stiff, head angled toward the river. Outside, twilight had turned the cracked valley floor into a silver-gray bruise. Ethan stepped out first, Maggie a half step behind him, wiping her palms on her jeans in a gesture that betrayed tension. For all her blunt confidence, Maggie didn't like the unknown any more than he did. She just hid it better. They followed Rex to the stake Ethan had driven 2 nights ago. The earth looked unchanged, until it wasn't. A faint green-blue light was leaking from the fissure in the clay, so dim it could have been mistaken for a trick of the dusk. But as Ethan crouched, the light brightened slightly, shifting like water under moonlight. Maggie exhaled a quiet curse. "Well, that's new." Ethan touched the edge of the crack. The soil was cool, colder than it had any right to be in the middle of summer. He pressed a little harder, and the faint vibration he'd felt on the first night thrummed through his bones again. Stronger now, like a heartbeat waking up. Rex let out a single sharp bark. Maggie crouched beside him, adjusting the headlamp she kept looped around her neck. Her face was cut by the beam of light. Strong cheekbones, weathered skin, a jaw that didn't shake easily. But there was a shadow in her eyes, the kind that comes from memory. She had lost a friend once underground, a collapse, a sealed door, a silence that followed her for years. "This isn't just some pipe," she said, voice tight. "No," Ethan replied, his own heartbeat ticking faster. "It's something alive." "Alive!" she shot back. "It's steel." "Steel remembers," Ethan said quietly. He didn't know why he'd said it, only that it felt true. Things buried for decades sometimes didn't stay quiet forever. They worked wordlessly after that. Maggie went to the truck and brought back her survey rig. An old field unit with cables, a sensor plate, and a handheld monitor the size of a lunchbox. She set it down on the ground near the crack and calibrated the readings. The screen flickered to life, glowing pale green. The first numbers were ordinary. Then the spikes began. There's a hollow chamber beneath us, Maggie said, her voice low but steady. Large, maybe 20, 30 feet down. Rectangular structure, the signals clean. Rex paced the perimeter, every step precise, nose down, ears twitching. He let out another short bark at a spot about 5 feet from the original fissure. Ethan knelt beside him, pushing at the clay with his hands. The soil crumbled easily. The plate's over here, he said. But whatever's glowing, that's spreading. Maggie looked at the monitor again. There's something else down there, a separate line. Ethan stared at the fissure, the faint light pulsing in slow, steady beats. Not a random flicker, a rhythm, just like the hum. The memory slammed into him hard. Afghanistan, a night patrol, a vibration beneath the sand, a minefield that announced itself not with noise but with rhythm. Back then, he'd learned to trust small signals. They always meant more than they seemed. His palms went damp. He wasn't in the desert now, but his mind didn't know the difference. Rex pressed his flank against Ethan's leg, grounding him without a word. Maggie saw the flicker in his expression, but didn't name it. She just handed him a pair of gloves. We dig. Slow. My way. He nodded. Your way. They set to work as the sky dimmed fully into night, a thin strip of moon catching the edge of Maggie's headlamp. The clay was dry, but fractured, breaking easily beneath shovel and hand. Every few feet, Maggie checked the sensor readings, her jaw locked tight. Ethan dug methodically, his muscles remembering old work, the kind done with quiet precision and too much at stake. Rex circled the site, occasionally pausing to growl at the earth as if trying to make it reveal its secret. By the time they'd cleared enough to expose the corner of the steel plate, the glow beneath had grown more distinct. It wasn't blinding, but it was steady, a weak blue-green shimmer bleeding through hairline cracks in the metal. The air itself felt colder. Ethan leaned closer. This isn't corrosion. It's light. Maggie knelt beside him, fingers brushing the surface. This plate's newer than the box. Newer than the map, even. Someone sealed this thing after the fact. Meaning what? Meaning whatever's down there wasn't supposed to be found. Rex let out a low growl. Not loud, not uncertain. A soldier's growl. Maggie straightened, crossing her arms tightly against the night air. We need to call someone. Ethan's reaction was instant. No. She shot him a look sharp enough to cut through concrete. Ethan, they'll lock this place down, he said, voice low but firm. Seal it up. We'll never know what's under there. You know I'm right. She stared at him for a long moment. Then with a sigh that sounded more like surrender than agreement, she nodded. Fine. But we do this carefully. Ethan's pulse thudded in his ears. He wasn't a young soldier anymore. He wasn't anyone's hero. But this thing under the ground, it had chosen their feet to rumble beneath. It wasn't chance. It was invitation. Rex sat at the edge of the pit they'd carved, tail still, head high, gaze locked on the light. The German shepherd's ears swiveled like radar dishes, tracking something they couldn't yet hear. Ethan placed his hand on the plate. The metal was cold, vibrating faintly like a faraway engine. His reflection in the blue-green light looked almost like a stranger's. A man older, heavier, with years he hadn't counted. Maggie watched him quietly. She knew that look. The look of someone who had seen darkness before and was about to walk into it again anyway. Well, she said finally, I guess we're going down. Ethan's lips curved, not quite a smile. Yeah, we are. Above them, The wind rose softly through the trees, a long, low breath. Below, the light pulsed again, stronger this time, as if answering. The dawn sky pressed low and pale over Stillwater Valley, heavy with mist that clung to the ground like a memory that refused to leave. The sun was only a suggestion beyond the gray, and the air smelled faintly of wet clay and rusting metal. After days of digging, the valley no longer felt quiet. It felt watched. Ethan Cole crouched at the edge of the excavation pit, his boots caked in layers of dried mud. The steel plate that had once gleamed faint blue now bore the marks of their persistence: scratches from crowbars, scorched patches from Maggie's cutting torch, and the dirt-stained fingerprints of too many hours spent in silence. His breath fogged the cool air. Under his palm, the metal hummed softly, steady and alive. Rex stood beside him, tail level, ears sharp, his amber eyes fixed on the hatch they had finally exposed. The German shepherd's coat was streaked with dust and earth, but his movements remained precise, steady. 7 years old, trained to keep calm under pressure. Rex was made for moments like this. Beside them, Maggie Reynolds lowered the blowtorch with a grunt. Sweat and grit clung to the creases around her sharp gray eyes. Her braid had come loose. Strands of silver hair stuck to her forehead. Maggie was 50, whip lean, tough, and far too stubborn to give up halfway. When the plate finally shifted 2 nights ago, she'd said only 3 words: "We keep going." And they had. Now, a circular steel hatch lay before them, heavy, corroded at the edges, but still sealed tight as a vault. A faded government warning label, barely legible beneath grime, ran across the rim. Authorized personnel only. Ethan ran his fingers over the letters. This hasn't been opened in decades. Maggie adjusted the strap on her work gloves. Then let's hope it's not full of snakes, gas leaks, or ghosts. Ethan gave a faint huff of a laugh. It was the kind of dry humor that had kept him alive in worse places. But beneath the humor, something else coiled tighter in his chest. A soldier's old instinct. Once you opened a door underground, you had no guarantee what waited on the other side. Rex paced forward and sniffed the seams of the hatch, ears twitching. Then he did something Ethan hadn't seen in years. He pawed at it once, then sat back, eyes fixed on the center like a guard dog awaiting orders. That silent signal was enough. Whatever was down there wasn't empty. "Ready?" Maggie asked. "No," Ethan said, gripping the wheel latch, "but that's never stopped me before." The hatch wheel groaned, metal grinding against metal like an old throat clearing itself after years of silence. A burst of cold, stale air rose from the darkness below. It smelled faintly of iron, old wiring, and still water. Rex backed up slightly but didn't growl. That was both comforting and unsettling. A ladder descended into the earth, narrow, slick with condensation, disappearing into a tunnel of black. Ethan clipped a headlamp to his collar and checked the battery on his flashlight. His hands were steady, but his heartbeat wasn't. The hum from below vibrated faintly through the rungs. "I'm going first," he said. "Of course you are," Maggie replied, but her voice had softened. An acknowledgement rather than a challenge. Rex went next, as he had done on countless missions overseas, waiting for the first 3 rungs before following, his movements fluid and precise. The darkness swallowed them both, leaving Maggie framed in the foggy daylight above. The air grew colder as Ethan descended, pressing against his lungs like water. Moisture clung to the concrete walls, streaking down in rivulets that caught the thin beam of his flashlight. When his boots touched solid ground, they splashed, not in a flood, but a shallow layer of standing water. The tunnel stretched ahead like a throat, lined with old conduit pipes, and the thick silence of things forgotten. Maggie's boots landed behind him a moment later. "Smells like an old bunker," she muttered. "Smells like time," Ethan replied quietly. Rex moved ahead in careful strides, ears swiveling. The tunnel led them into a narrow corridor. Rivulets of green moss climbed the walls like veins, and above, fluorescent light fixtures flickered faintly. Some were dead. One or two hummed, dim but alive. Something down here was still feeding power. Ethan ran a hand over a wall panel. The metal was damp, but warm. A hum, low, mechanical, constant, vibrated through his fingertips. "Generators," he whispered. "Old, but still running." Maggie frowned. "No generator lasts this long without maintenance. Someone built this to last." The corridor opened into a wider chamber, half swallowed by shadow. And then they saw it. A room still lit after all these years. A single bank of fluorescent lights burned pale white against the gloom, casting a cold halo over the space. Inside, rows of tanks lined the floor. Tall, cylindrical, glass and steel, fogging gently with the temperature difference. Condensation ran down their sides like slow tears, and inside each one, water. Crystal clear water, pulsing gently as if breathing. Maggie's breath caught. Holy hell! Ethan stepped closer. The tanks were connected by thick pipes running along the ceiling and into the walls, like an underground circulatory system. Some of the tanks contained floating seed capsules, dark shapes suspended in clear liquid. Others glimmered faintly blue, as though light itself lived inside. "Hydropods," Maggie said. Her voice trembled, not with fear, but awe. "This is advanced biofiltration tech. I thought they scrapped these programs decades ago." Rex sniffed the air near the base of one tank, ears perked. He didn't react with aggression, which told Ethan two things. There were no chemical threats, and whatever this system was, it wasn't hostile. On the wall, a rusted metal sign leaned crooked on its hinges. Faded letters read, "Project Haven, Water Preservation Unit, 4. Ethan traced the letters with his thumb, the weight of them settling heavy on his shoulders. They built this to save water. Not just water, Maggie said, moving between the tanks with the sure steps of someone who understood machines. Look at this setup. Closed-loop filtration, independent power lines. If everything else topside went to hell, this place could keep a supply of clean water going for years. Decades, maybe. Ethan pressed his palm to the tank's surface. The glass was cool and slick, and beneath it, the water glimmered as though it carried its own light. His reflection stared back at him, not as the man who came home from war, but as someone standing at the edge of a story bigger than himself. For a moment, silence settled between them, broken only by the faint hum of machines that should have died long ago. Rex suddenly barked once, sharply, the sound echoing through the hall like a bell. Ethan turned. At the far end of the chamber, a secondary door stood half open, its frame streaked with rust. Something behind it exhaled a slow, mechanical sigh. Ethan's hand went to the flashlight on his belt. Maggie followed without a word. They crossed the damp floor, their boots slapping softly against shallow water. The door led to a control room, small, cramped, lined with outdated terminals coated in dust. But one screen was still alive. Its faint green glow bathed the room in a sickly light. The display pulsed with old data streams, temperature regulation, filtration levels, contamination alerts, most of them silent, but still running. A blinking cursor flashed at the bottom of the terminal like a heartbeat. Jesus, Maggie whispered. This thing's been running on its own for decades. Ethan leaned close, scanning the display. The dates on the logs ended abruptly 30 years ago. No shutdown command. No failure. Just silence. They didn't close it, he murmured. They just left. He found a clipboard hanging from a rusted hook beside the terminal. The pages were brittle, edges curled, but the handwriting remained legible. It listed maintenance protocols, emergency procedures, and a note scribbled at the bottom in blue ink. If the surface fails, the river remembers. Maggie met his gaze. This isn't just a bunker. It's a promise, Ethan said softly. Rex nudged his knee, breaking the weight of the silence. Ethan scratched the dog's head absently, mind racing. The government had built this place as a failsafe, to protect water, to preserve seeds, to give the land something to fall back on if everything else died. But no one had ever come back. Above them, still water's drought baked the earth. But down here, beneath their boots, life had been quietly breathing for decades. Project Haven, Maggie said, shaking her head slowly. They called it a myth for years. Ethan stared at the tanks, at the glowing water. It's not a myth anymore. The hum of the generators filled the silence, steady as a heartbeat. Rex lay down beside the hatch, ears still alert. Maggie ran her fingers along a pipe, feeling the warmth of moving water beneath the metal. And Ethan, standing in the center of the chamber, knew they had uncovered something far larger than they'd ever imagined. Night fell heavy over Stillwater Valley. A damp wind swept through the empty streets, stirring dust and the smell of dry earth. The riverbed, once silent, secretive, was no longer theirs alone. Headlights had been seen on the ridge earlier that day, and whispers moved through town like weeds through cracked pavement. Someone had been talking, and someone else had been listening. Ethan Cole leaned against the porch railing, a shadow carved against the dim porch light. His hands, calloused from weeks of digging, gripped the wood tightly. The world he'd kept quiet with Maggie and Rex was beginning to slip through his fingers. Rumors never stayed buried long, secrets even less. Down in the pit, the steel hatch was covered again with a tarp and sandbags, a poor disguise for something that glowed faintly when night fell. Rex lay on the porch at Ethan's feet, head resting on his paws, but eyes open, ears twitching at every gust of wind. He had been restless since the first set of strange trucks passed through town. So had Ethan. Maggie pulled up in her rust-red pickup, headlights off. She climbed out, boots crunching on the gravel. She wore her usual denim jacket over a grease-stained work shirt, but her hair was tied back tighter tonight. There was tension in the way she moved. "We've got a problem," she said, skipping greetings. "I figured," Ethan replied. "Who talked?" She shoved her hands into her jacket pockets. "Might have been that foreman over at the quarry. Someone saw us hauling equipment near the river last week. Word spread fast." "Of course it did," Ethan muttered. "Small town." Maggie's jaw tightened. "And now Travis Holt wants a piece of it." Ethan stilled. He hadn't heard that name in years, but it carried weight like a storm cloud. Travis Holt was a man who made money out of other people's water. 55, broad-shouldered, clean-shaven, with steel-gray hair cropped close to his head, and a tan that came more from golf courses than labor. Always in tailored jackets, expensive boots. His smile was the kind people mistook for charm until they saw what it cost. He'd bought up half the land north of the valley in the last decade, turning forest into concrete. Ethan had spent a lifetime spotting predators. Holt wore his smile like camouflage. He's planning to build a hydroelectric dam upstream, Maggie said flatly. This valley's part of the land he's been trying to acquire for years. He thinks what's under that hatch is leverage. Ethan's knuckles whitened on the railing. And he's not the kind of man who asks politely. No, she agreed. He's the kind of man who sends people in the dark. The first threat came the next morning. Two men in pressed shirts and two clean boots arrived at Ethan's porch, pretending to be part of a development assessment team. They were polite in the way wolves are polite when they're already inside the pen. One spoke with a practiced smile, while the other scanned the property with quiet calculation. Ethan recognized their type instantly. Men who had never built anything with their hands, but carried the weight of other men's money. He gave them nothing, and they left with thin smiles. Maggie called it a warning shot. Ethan called it round one. Within the week, Holt himself appeared at the local diner. He didn't need to speak to Ethan directly. Men like Holt never dirtied their own hands when they could buy others to do it. But he made sure word reached Ethan. Sell the land or be removed from it. The local officials didn't care. Water was money, and money spoke louder than veterans or old dogs. The night it happened, the air was unnaturally still. Maggie was at the workshop, and Ethan had fallen asleep on the porch chair, boots still on. Rex lifted his head first. The soft growl woke Ethan faster than any alarm. Headlights flashed briefly through the trees. Engines idled without approaching. A bad sign. Professional. Ethan grabbed the flashlight, heart thudding with that old, familiar rhythm. He and Rex moved quietly toward the pit. That's when he saw them. 3 figures, dressed in dark work clothes, moving with purpose. One carried a bolt cutter, another a crowbar. A third held a portable floodlight. Not amateurs, Ethan muttered. They were already at the hatch when he called out, "You're on the wrong land." The nearest man turned. A scar ran down his left cheek, pale against the dark. "We're just clearing the way," he said, voice smooth but empty. "Orders from Mr. Holt." Ethan stepped forward. "Not tonight." The man's smile didn't reach his eyes. "This isn't your choice." The crowbar struck first, metal shrieking against metal. The steel hatch shuddered. Ethan lunged forward, fists meeting ribs, and for a moment the world went back to sand and smoke and survival. But 3 men were a lot, and time was short. One shoved him hard, another forced the latch. Then the world roared. The pressure from below was stronger than any of them expected. Decades of sealed water burst upward like a beast freed from a cage. The hatch exploded open, throwing 2 of the intruders backward. Cold water, dark with silt and mud, surged out of the earth with a roar that drowned out everything else. Rex barked once, sharply, then leapt toward Ethan as the flood slammed into them. Ethan felt the ground disappear beneath his boots, felt the cold like a blade along his spine. For an instant, all he saw was chaos. Black water, spinning light, men shouting and vanishing into the torrent. Rex tried to reach higher ground, but the current was too strong. His paws slipped on the slick mud, his claws scraping uselessly. Ethan's lungs seized. He saw the flash of his dog's eyes, a mix of fear and stubborn loyalty. "Rex!" he shouted, his voice ripped away by the surge. Without thinking, Ethan dove after him. The water was colder than anything he'd ever felt. Not just cold, ancient, heavy. It dragged like a fist around his chest. He caught sight of Rex's tail vanishing beneath a swirl of brown current. The dog was strong, trained, but no creature could fight water like this for long. Ethan's hands found fur. Rex kicked instinctively, twisting in panic before recognizing his touch. Ethan wrapped an arm around the dog's chest, pulling upward, fighting both the current and the crushing weight of fear. The riverbed had turned into a trap, a sinkhole of their own making. His head went under. For a heartbeat, there was only silence, bubbles, and the cold. Then he kicked upward again, breaking the surface with a gasp that burned. The water dragged at his boots. His old injuries screamed. But Rex was alive in his arms, thrashing, fighting to stay afloat. A shape loomed through the floodlight. Maggie. She had arrived fast, truck engine still running behind her. She grabbed a long branch, shouting something he couldn't hear over the water. Ethan reached for it once, missed. Reached again, fingers caught bark. Maggie hauled with a strength carved by decades of wrenching engines. The three of them collapsed on the muddy ground, gasping. Water still poured from the hatch in a feral rush, flooding the trench and the nearby brush. One of Holt's men scrambled away into the darkness. The other two were nowhere to be seen. Rex coughed water from his lungs, a hoarse sound that broke something in Ethan's chest. He cradled the dog's head with shaking hands. "Easy, Captain," he whispered, voice raw. "Easy." Maggie knelt beside them, soaked to the bone, her braid plastered to her neck. "They tried to kill you," she said. Her voice wasn't loud. It was worse, cold. Ethan looked at the torrent still gushing from the hatch. "No," he rasped. "They tried to erase this." Rex pushed against him weakly, then rested his head on Ethan's thigh. His fur was soaked, his breathing rough but steady. That stubborn spark was still in his eyes. Ethan's throat tightened. He'd fought wars, watched men fall, but the thought of losing this dog here, like this, was almost too much. Above them, night wind cut sharp against the wet earth. In the distance, the faint hum of engines faded into silence. Holt had made his first move. This was no longer about land. It was war. Morning light spilled through the narrow hospital window, like water through cracked stone. Outside, Stillwater Valley was wrapped in a soft fog, quiet and pale after the night of chaos. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant and rain. Inside room 204, Ethan Cole lay beneath a thin white sheet, the steady beeping of the monitor at his bedside syncing with the slow, heavy rhythm of his heart. His body ached as if he'd gone 12 rounds with the river itself. His ribs burned when he tried to breathe too deeply. But the first thing he saw wasn't the IV line in his arm or the dull ceiling light overhead. It was Rex. The German shepherd lay curled up on the floor beside his bed, bandaged on one foreleg. Fur still a little damp, but brushed clean. His amber eyes were open, calm but alert, tracking Ethan's every movement. Someone had cleaned the mud from his coat, wrapped him in a thin blanket. The sight punched the air from Ethan's chest harder than the water had. "You made it, Captain," he rasped, his voice a sandpaper whisper. Rex lifted his head, thumped his tail weakly against the linoleum floor, and let out a soft huff. It was enough. Ethan turned his face away, just slightly, because a man can survive a flood, but not always what follows it. A soft knock came at the door, and Maggie Reynolds pushed it open with her shoulder, holding a takeout cup of bad hospital coffee. Her gray braid was frayed, dark circles carved beneath sharp eyes. She looked exhausted, like someone who hadn't slept since the world cracked open. But she was standing. "Well," she said, setting the cup on the tray table. "About damn time you woke up." "Couldn't miss the party," Ethan muttered. Maggie pulled up the plastic chair, sat, and crossed her arms. "You nearly drowned, Cole. You almost sound like you care." She snorted softly. "Don't flatter yourself. The dog's the one everyone's asking about." Ethan's lips twitched. Figures. But behind Maggie's sarcasm, he saw the crack in her armor. It was faint, but there. The tremor in her hands, the way her gaze lingered on the bruises across his face. She'd pulled them both out of that flood, and part of her was still down there in the water, just like him. "I'm guessing Holt didn't stick around to help?" Ethan asked. Maggie's mouth tightened. "No, but he made a hell of a mess trying to cover his tracks." She reached into her jacket and slid a phone across the tray toward him. The screen was black, but when she tapped it, a paused video filled the display. The image was unmistakable. The hidden chamber beneath the river, the glowing water tanks, the rusted sign reading Project Haven. The angle was shaky but clear, Maggie's handiwork. "You recorded everything," Ethan said quietly. "Every bolt, every pipe, every inch of it," Maggie replied. "And while you were out cold, I uploaded it. Not to some local blog either. National. Outlets. Environmental groups. Veterans networks. Hell, it's probably halfway around the world by now." Ethan stared at the screen. The thumbnail showed Rex standing in the middle of the glowing chamber, mud on his fur, looking every inch like the soldier's dog he was. The title beneath the video made his throat tighten. "Veteran and his dog discover forgotten water vault beneath dry river." Maggie leaned back, exhaustion etched into her posture. You should have seen it. By the time the sun came up, the story was everywhere. Project Haven is trending. People are furious. Reporters are circling like vultures. Ethan tried to process it through the haze of painkillers and bruised ribs. He'd spent his life avoiding spotlights, not walking into them. The idea of his quiet valley splashed across headlines felt like stepping on a live wire. "And Holt?" he asked. Her smile held no warmth. "He's trying to play it off. Said it was an unfortunate misunderstanding about a development project. But now the feds are sniffing around." Once the words environmental protection and government facility hit the air, it stopped being his game. Before Ethan could answer, there was a knock. This time sharper. Official. A woman stepped into the room, crisp navy suit, dark hair pulled into a tight bun. She was in her late 30s, with sharp cheekbones and eyes like polished obsidian. Calm, unreadable. "Mr. Cole?" she asked. "I'm Special Agent Valerie Quinn, Department of Environmental Protection and Federal Oversight. I'd like to ask a few questions about what happened on your property." Her badge flashed briefly against the light. Maggie shot Ethan a look, one that said, "Be careful." Valerie Quinn moved like someone used to being obeyed. Her voice was measured, almost gentle, but her gaze missed nothing. "We've reviewed the video footage your friend provided. It appears your discovery involves a long-abandoned federal water preservation facility. Do you understand the significance of what you uncovered?" Ethan shifted slightly against the pillow. "I didn't uncover it to make headlines." "I understand," she replied evenly. "But headlines have been made." She opened a folder, sliding out a printed still from the video. "There's already public outrage. Environmental coalitions are demanding protection orders. Lawmakers are calling for investigations into recent land acquisitions near Stillwater, and Mr. Travis Holt, her voice cooled just a degree, is under preliminary federal scrutiny. Ethan's jaw clenched. Good. Valerie studied him for a long moment, then said, I need you to give an official statement. What you saw, what happened the night of the flood. It will help us build a case. Maggie interjected before Ethan could answer. He almost died down there. Maybe give him a minute before dragging him into legal hell. Valerie turned to Maggie, assessing her in that precise, surgical way. Ms. Reynolds, your footage is the reason this investigation exists. The faster we act, the less chance there is for Mr. Holt to interfere. Ethan exhaled slowly. War had taught him many things. How to fight, how to survive, how to keep breathing when everything else burned. But it had never taught him how to be the center of a storm. He reached down, brushing his fingers over Rex's fur. The dog leaned into his touch, solid and alive. I'll talk, Ethan said finally, but on my terms. Valerie's dark eyes softened, just barely. That's all I ask. She left them with a business card and a warning. Media trucks were already parked outside the hospital. After she was gone, Maggie stood, running a hand over her face. You know this isn't going away, right? Ethan stared at the ceiling. Yeah, I know. The door creaked open again, this time with less formality. A cluster of locals, faces Ethan recognized from the diner, the gas station, the old mill, peeked in shyly. One of them, an older woman named Nancy Caldwell, stepped forward. She was in her late 60s, hair white as chalk, round glasses perched on her nose, wearing a sun-faded cardigan. Nancy was the kind of woman who remembered every storm that ever passed through Stillwater. She carried a small bouquet of wildflowers. We heard what happened, she said softly. What you did, what you found. Thank you. Behind her, a young mechanic. Eli Turner nodded awkwardly. Early 20s, grease under his nails, always kept his cap too low over his eyes. He'd once fixed Ethan's truck for free, saying, I owe vets. Now, he looked at Ethan with something between awe and fear. Ethan didn't know how to handle gratitude. He never had. So he just nodded once, slowly. Nancy placed the flowers on the windowsill and patted Rex's head before leaving. Eli followed, whispering something about the whole town being on your side. When the room was quiet again, Maggie let out a low whistle. You just became a hero, Cole. He gave a hollow laugh. Hell of a way to earn a title. Rex nudged his hand again, as if to remind him what mattered. Outside, distant chants were rising. Protesters or supporters, he couldn't tell yet. But the words, Project Haven, were spreading like wildfire. What had been a buried secret was now an open wound the whole country could see. Ethan closed his eyes. All he'd wanted was quiet. But maybe the world didn't give quiet to men who stood on fault lines. It gave them choices, and he had just made his. The rain came like a long-awaited confession, steady and soft at first, then fuller, a river reborn. Stillwater Valley lay under a silver-gray sky, the ground damp and dark, carrying the scent of soil and spring. Water spilled down the slopes and into the once-cracked riverbed, filling its empty spine with a sound the valley hadn't heard in years, a flowing heartbeat. Ethan Cole stood beneath the half-finished awning of the New Haven Center, watching the river swell. He wore his old canvas jacket despite the season, hands tucked into the pockets as cold mist clung to his beard and hair. He was a man rebuilt, not all at once, but piece by piece. the way rivers carve stone. Behind him, machines hummed softly, not like secrets this time, but like something meant to stay. Rex sat at his side, muzzle flecked with gray that hadn't been there last spring. Age had crept in quietly, but the German shepherd still held himself with the quiet dignity of a soldier. His tail swished lazily on the wet ground. He no longer barked at the river like it was a stranger. Now it was an old friend returned. The Haven Water and Seed Conservation Center stood where the hidden bunker used to sleep, under layers of dust. The steel hatch was still there, sealed open now, surrounded by reinforced glass and modern equipment. What had once been forgotten was now protected, maintained by hands that understood its worth. Maggie Reynolds walked up behind Ethan, pulling her raincoat tighter against the wind. Her silver braid was damp, and her boots left deep prints in the mud. Her hands bore grease stains that no amount of soap could erase. She hadn't changed much. She never would. But her eyes were softer these days, as if the fight had finally given her something to hold instead of something to lose. "Well," she said, standing beside him, "look at that." The river twisted through the valley again, cutting its way past the cottonwoods, glinting under the gray sky like a promise kept. People had gathered along the banks, dozens of them. Farmers, mechanics, shopkeepers, kids with rain boots. The valley had waited for this day. "Never thought I'd see it full again?" Ethan said quietly. Maggie's laugh was low and rough around the edges. "Never thought I'd see your stubborn ass running a conservation center either." He huffed, almost smiling. "Didn't plan to. No one ever plans the right things," she said, her voice lighter now. Down near the water, workers in neon vests carried crates of preserved seeds and equipment into the converted facility. It wasn't fancy. Haven wasn't meant to be. But it worked. It was real. The hydropods in the underground chamber had been refurbished. New filtration systems were installed. Clean water now flowed out of the old vault, feeding the river rather than hiding from it. The government had turned the site into a protected reserve, but they hadn't sent strangers to run it. They had sent Ethan and Maggie. "I still don't trust those politicians," Maggie muttered, watching a white SUV parked on the other side of the river. Federal agents and state officials were standing there, clipboards in hand, pretending to understand the land. They loved taking credit for things they almost destroyed. Ethan's jaw tightened, but his voice was even. "Let them talk. We'll keep working." Rex leaned against his leg, a warm, steady weight that grounded him more than any speech could. The dog was officially the Haven Center's mascot now. The town had even printed his image on the visitor brochures. "Guardian of the Flow," they called him. Ethan found it ridiculous. Maggie found it perfect. Further downriver, a small crowd was gathering near the new memorial site. The rain had lightened to a mist, silvering every surface. A stone statue, waist high, stood at the edge of the water. A simple sculpture of a shepherd dog beside a man in work boots, both looking out toward the river. Below it, carved into the wet stone, were the words, "For those who guarded the flow. Cho Nung Ngoy Gyu Dong Che." Ethan hadn't wanted a statue. He'd argued against it in every meeting. But the town hadn't asked for permission. They'd built it anyway. And standing here now, with Rex leaning against his leg and the water running free again, he couldn't quite bring himself to hate it. Nancy Caldwell was among the crowd, her white hair tucked under a hood, glasses fogged from the mist. She placed a handful of early spring flowers at the base of the statue. Around her, children splashed in the shallows, their laughter carrying over the water. For the first time in years, Stillwater Valley sounded alive. "Looks like we started something," Maggie said quietly. "Yeah," Ethan replied. "Something good." Behind them, a young woman approached, clipboard in hand. She was in her early 30s, tall, with warm brown skin, dark curls tied back in a bun, and a sharp, curious look in her eyes. She wore a navy field jacket with the Haven Center patch sewn on the arm. Her name was Lena Martinez, a hydrologist assigned to support the center. She had grown up 3 towns over, studied environmental engineering, and returned to work with the people who lived here. She had a way of talking about water like it was a living thing, not a resource, but a companion. "Mr. Cole," she said, stopping a few feet away. "We just finished calibrating the secondary outflow system. It's stable. The readings are good." Ethan nodded. "Good work?" Lena smiled, a quick, bright thing that made her look younger than her years. "And the press wants a word, but I told them they could wait. You've got some time before they try to make you sound like a superhero." Maggie chuckled. "He's already unbearable enough. Don't make it worse." Ethan rolled his eyes. "I'm not talking to cameras. You don't have to," Lena said. "The river's doing the talking now." She walked back toward the facility, boots splashing lightly in puddles, leaving Ethan with Maggie and Rex. The sky was still gray, but not the kind that promised storms. It was the kind that promised growth. He watched as a group of kids ran past, their laughter echoing against the wet earth. One of them, a little boy in a yellow raincoat, stopped to pat Rex on the head before dashing away. The dog blinked slowly, accepting the tiny hand without complaint. "Seems the locals like your partner," Maggie said. "Yeah," Ethan replied, voice softer now. "So do I." He thought about the night of the flood, the sound of rushing water, the way Rex had looked at him underwater, trusting even then. That look had carried him through everything that followed: the hospital, the investigation, the interviews. Now, it anchored him here, not as a man who stumbled into a secret, but as someone who stayed to guard it. Maggie nudged his shoulder lightly. "I never told you, but when I saw you two in that water, I thought you were both gone." "You should have known better," Ethan said. "Oh, I did," she said, a faint grin on her lips. "But I also know trouble sticks to you like wet clay." For a long time, they just stood there, watching the river roll. The roar was softer now, not a flood, not a hum, but a steady, breathing thing. Stillwater had returned to itself. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we'd ignored it?" Maggie asked. Ethan didn't answer right away. He looked down at Rex, at the people, at the statue by the river. "No," he said finally. "I don't. Because we didn't." She nodded once, satisfied. The sound of bells rang from the town square, a new addition since the center opened. The crowd along the river began to move toward it, where a small ceremony would be held to mark the river's return. Lena waved from the entrance of the facility. Maggie jerked her chin toward the crowd. "Come on, hero." "I told you not to call me that," Ethan muttered. "Yeah," she said, already walking away. "I wasn't asking." Ethan followed, Rex padding at his side, the mud soft under their boots. As they passed the statue, he glanced at the inscription again. The words caught the gray light in a way that made them glow faintly against the wet stone. "For those who guarded the flow." He didn't feel like a hero. He didn't want to be one, but he felt something else now, something that had been missing since the war ended and the world got small. He felt rooted. Rex trotted ahead, tail lifted, ears alert. Maggie barked a quick laugh when the dog shook water onto her boots. Ethan let the sound settle into him like the rain itself. Stillwater was alive again, and so was he. The last light of summer spilled gently across Stillwater Valley, draping the river in threads of gold. The air was warm and heavy with the scent of clover and wet soil, carrying the faint song of crickets from the tall grass. The river moved slowly, deliberately, like an old friend in no hurry to leave. It had seen too much to rush anymore. Ethan Cole sat in the same weathered wooden chair he had built decades ago, its legs sunk slightly into the damp earth. His hands rested on the smooth curve of his cane, fingers thickened by time and labor. His beard had turned silver, and deep creases framed his face like tributaries branching from the river itself. He still wore the same old canvas jacket, though now it hung looser around his frame. Beside him lay Rex. The German shepherd's once dark coat was now streaked almost entirely with white, his movements slower but still deliberate. His ears twitched at every sound, the wind threading through the reeds, the quiet splashes of fish below the surface, the occasional laughter of children playing upstream. His amber eyes were cloudier now, but when he looked at Ethan, they held the same sharpness, the same quiet loyalty they always had. They had grown old together. The Haven Water and Seed Conservation Center stood a few hundred feet behind them, its glass walls glowing softly in the fading light. Over the years, the center had grown, not into something larger, but something deeper. More people, more hands, more hearts. Lena Martinez now ran the day-to-day operations, but Ethan's chair by the river remained untouched. Everyone knew that was his place. He didn't need to be in the control rooms anymore. His fight was long behind him. What remained was the river, Rex, and the sound of water, a sound he trusted more than the ticking of any clock. Footsteps approached on the soft grass. Ethan didn't need to turn. He recognized the bright, quick rhythm of children before he heard their voices. A group of 5 or 6 kids emerged from the path, their faces flushed with excitement, their clothes muddied from chasing frogs and dragonflies. At the front was a girl of about 10, her hair a storm of brown curls, eyes wide and curious. Her name was Hazel Kim, a local girl whose parents worked at the Haven Center. She was small and wiry, with quick movements and a fearless grin, the kind that made grown men remember what it felt like to be brave. She clutched a notebook to her chest like it held the whole world inside. "Mr. Ethan," she called, breathless from running. "Will you tell it again?" Ethan tilted his head slightly, the corner of his mouth twitching upward. "Tell what?" She stomped her muddy boot playfully. "The story, the one about the house under the river." Behind her, the other children shuffled closer. There was Daniel, a freckled boy with a chipped front tooth and a habit of leaning forward like he might miss a single word. Maya, a quiet girl with straight black hair and serious eyes who always sat cross-legged when she listened. Leo, tall for his age, pretended not to care, but always stayed to the end. The others followed like ducklings in a line. Rex raised his head, tail tapping the ground softly. The children immediately crowded around him, their laughter bubbling like spring water. Hazel leaned down to scratch behind his ears, and the old shepherd closed his eyes, breathing in the warmth of small hands. The kids called him Captain Rex, a name that had outlived any badge or medal. Ethan let out a slow, steady breath, the kind that came from somewhere older than words. These children had never known Stillwater dry. To them, the river was not a miracle. It was simply home. He tapped his cane lightly against the ground. "All right," he said. "But it's not really a story about a house." Hazel's eyes lit up. "I know. It's about you and Rex." "Not just me," Ethan corrected softly. "It was about all of us." The children settled on the grass, wet hems soaking into the earth. Fireflies flickered to life in the reeds. The sun had dipped low now, setting the water alight in shimmering gold. Ethan looked at Rex, and then at the river, letting the weight of memory settle around him. Not heavy anymore, just warm. "It started," he began slowly, "in a summer a lot like this one. The river had gone dry. The earth cracked open, and it felt like the world was holding its breath." The children leaned closer. Even Leo, pretending to pick at the grass, didn't look away. "Back then," Ethan continued, "it was just me and Rex. I thought I'd left all my battles behind overseas. Thought the river was just a place to sit and forget. But rivers don't let you forget. They remember everything. And one night, they whispered." He told it the way he always did, not as a hero, but as a witness. About the sound beneath the earth. About the night the ground trembled. About Maggie Reynolds and her grease-stained hands. About the sealed steel door and the forgotten chamber below Stillwater. About the people who tried to bury it, and the people who stood their ground. He spoke of the storm, the flood, the moment he thought Rex was gone. His voice faltered only slightly at that part, but the children didn't miss it. Maya's small fingers curled into the grass like roots. "And when it was over," Ethan said, voice gentler now, "the river came back, not because of me, not because of any one person. It came back because enough of us believed it should." Hazel frowned, as if trying to hold on to something bigger than she could name. "But weren't you scared?" Ethan looked down at his hands. They were rough, weathered, honest hands. "Of course I was," he said. "Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's what you do when the fear is louder than your heartbeat." Daniel whispered, "Like Rex." Ethan smiled at that. Slow and real. Exactly like Rex. The shepherd stirred as if understanding, tail brushing softly against the grass. His muzzle was white as snow, but the loyalty in him burned steady. The children leaned in to pet him, and for a moment Ethan saw the faces of men and women long gone. Maggie laughing at some sarcastic remark, Nancy placing flowers by the river, Valerie Quinn with her clipboard and sharp eyes, Lena running the pumps with quiet determination. The river had outlived them all. It would outlive him too. Hazel flipped open her notebook and began sketching as Ethan spoke. She always did. A small house, a steel hatch, a dog with a proud tail. She wanted to remember. When the story ended, silence hung in the air. Not empty, but full. The children didn't clap or cheer. They simply sat there, listening to the river as if it carried the last lines Ethan hadn't spoken aloud. Rex let out a soft bark, a quiet, "I'm here," as if to close the chapter. Ethan leaned back in his chair, feeling the weight of the evening settle into his bones. He knew he was old. His hands ached. His breath was shorter than it used to be. But he felt no sorrow. If anything, there was a deep, quiet joy, like standing on the far shore of a long, hard journey. Hazel stood and stepped closer, holding out her drawing. "For you, Mr. Ethan." she said shyly. He looked down. It wasn't perfect. Children's drawings never were. But it was true. Him and Rex. The river. The hatch. A beam of light rising from the water. Above it, in crooked letters, she had written, "The House of Light." Ethan swallowed around something warm and heavy in his chest. "Thank you," he said softly. "Will you tell it again tomorrow?" Daniel asked. Ethan chuckled, low and rough. "Tomorrow's the river's turn to tell it." The children laughed, unsure what he meant, but loving the sound of it. One by one, they ran off toward the village path, their footsteps leaving little prints in the damp earth. Hazel turned back once, waving. Ethan lifted his hand in return. Rex shifted closer, resting his head on Ethan's knee. The old man ran his fingers through the thick white fur, feeling the rise and fall of his friend's breathing. Sunset draped the valley in golden fire. The river glowed as if lit from within. Ethan whispered, "Every good thing starts with a seed and a loyal heart." Rex answered with a single bark, bright and sure. The water answered too, in its own language, soft, endless, alive. And so the story closed, not with silence, but with the river still singing. From a hidden door beneath a dry river to a home filled with light. This story began with a single seed and a loyal heart. But it was never just about Ethan and Rex. It was about how faith, courage, and love can bring life back to what the world thought was lost. Sometimes, God's miracles don't come with thunder or lightning. They come quietly, through loyal friends, through hands that refuse to give up, and through a river that dares to flow again. God doesn't always move mountains. Sometimes he lets water carve its way through stone, slowly, faithfully. In our everyday lives, we all have a dry river, a place that feels forgotten or too broken to heal. But with faith, kindness, and persistence, that place can bloom again. Because where hope lives, miracles follow. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs a reminder that God is still at work in quiet places. Leave a comment, subscribe to this channel, and let's build a circle of hope and faith together. May God bless you and your loved ones. May he keep your river flowing, your faith strong, and your heart steadfast.